This happened in September 1999. I remember that we had an excellent, hot, almost rainless summer, which pleased many people. But now, to the chagrin of those who love to soak up the sun, it has passed, and the lush green nature began to fade. I lived in my grandmother's two-room apartment, who, for health reasons, moved into our apartment, where I vacated my room for her. It's just that Grandma's heart began to play around, and if anything, there's no one to call an ambulance when she's alone, and here my parents are nearby. To be honest, I was not enthusiastic about this housing move, since the area was foreign and the neighbors were unfamiliar. But during the month of August I got used to it. But there was one advantage. He was his own boss. However, I did not abuse my lordly position. Although I was still 27 years old at that time and single, by my nature I was not one of the rogues. Noisy drinking parties with orgies and whores were not to my liking. I only once invited my best friends to drink beer quietly and peacefully, and I was still bored all by myself. And then one Sunday evening I climbed into the bathroom to wash myself. He took some water and lazily lay back. I lay there for about 10 minutes, lost in my thoughts, and suddenly there was a distinct knock on the bathroom door. I jumped up in surprise. I thought my heart would stop from fear. "Yes?" I mumbled in a questioning and trembling voice. The answer is silence. I sat in the water and looked at the door in horror. Thieves? I thought. But the apartment was locked. It is unlikely that they would break into it, even in the evening when there is a tenant in it. It's also not possible to climb from the roof. The third floor is in a 5-story Khrushchev building. And suddenly there was a knock on the bathroom door again. "Yes? Are you a neighbor?" I asked, trying to speak at least in intonation without fear. But again, silence. I turned off the taps and stood up to my full height. "We need to go out and look," I decided. Fortunately, it's not yet the dead of night outside, and I'm not a muslin young lady. If anything, I'll have time to charge my fist at least once. Without drying myself, I dressed in home clothes, sweatpants and a t-shirt. Then he froze, thoughtful. If they lure me outside, then most likely they are prepared in advance for a specific attack. We must take the risk of being ahead of the curve and then whatever happens. And I sharply opened the latch and jerked the door open. But there's no one behind her, and there was no one in the whole apartment. The sunset was already fading outside the window. I slept that night with the light on and a kitchen knife under the blanket. The next weekend, when I came to visit my parents, I told them and my grandmother about this incident. Granny confidently answered that it was a brownie and ordered him to pour milk into a saucer, put it in the corner of the room, put a piece of bread next to it and say, "Housewife, brownie, accept a treat from me. Don't scare me anymore. Let's live in friendship." Although it was scary for me to do such a ritual, I performed it. And from then on, I really washed calmly. Last summer, my mom, dad, and I decided to go to our dacha in Zaslavl. At that time, I was 16. I took my beloved dog Terry, German Shepherd, with me. In general, around 15:20, we finally arrived and entered the house. Everything was fine. Mom went to cook all sorts of goodies, and Dad climbed into the attic and looked for spare parts for the motorcycle. Everything was fine. I was running around the garden with Terry and doing nonsense. The evening was already approaching. It was about 18. We sat down at the table in the kitchen, began to eat and discuss family issues. But suddenly they called my father. He answered the phone. His face took on an alarmed look. When he finished the conversation, we asked what was the matter. He said that our neighbor Aunt Lena had died. We lived next door, communicated well. She often treated me and my dog. Our relationship was good, but Strashno.com, here it is. 45 years old and she's already gone. I was upset and went to another room. Suddenly, my parents came to me and said that they should go to the city and find out what happened. However, I had to stay. I was terribly scared, but fortunately, my faithful friend was with me. Around 7 o'clock, Mom and Dad left the house and told me to keep an eye on everything until they arrived. They promised to be back by 5 a.m., and my mother also added that if something happens, call. This gave me strength, and as soon as they left, I walked Terry, and then, when we arrived, I locked all the doors and all the windows too. It was already dark. To make it not so scary, I turned on the lights in the whole house, took 2 powerful flashlights and turned on the TV. My friend and I sat down on the strashno.com sofa and started watching TV. Time passed quickly. Terry was already falling asleep on my lap, but suddenly I heard something fall in the next room. Out of fear, I turned up the volume on the TV. It was about 11 o'clock. I took the phone, just in case, and when I turned it on, I noticed that the network was unavailable, although everything was working a couple of hours ago. Okay, I paid special attention to this and continued watching TV. Suddenly, bam! The electricity went out in the entire house. I was scared, but not at a loss. Took several candles. I prepared them in advance because I knew that something bad could happen, and set them on fire. They gave off a dim light like never before, but that didn't bother me. I took the flashlight in my left hand and hugged the dog. We lay there for about 20 minutes. I was already thinking about how to fall asleep, but then the most terrible moment of the whole story happened. I heard strashno.com someone walking in the attic. I immediately wanted to jump out of my seat and, just in case, take the axe that was standing by the stove. But just as I was about to get up, I saw a certain white silhouette outside the window, walking quite quickly. My dog somehow became wary and sat down next to me, as if he had smelled someone and was ready to rush at him. But I kept it, because I was afraid to make noise. I'm lying there, listening, and suddenly I hear someone knocking on the door. But not humanly, but very slowly with an interval of 4 seconds. At first, I thought that my parents had come, but why knock? They definitely have keys, and they wouldn't knock like this creature. I was terribly scared. I wanted to cover myself with a blanket and hide from all this, but I couldn't. I was afraid to move. And suddenly the knocking stopped, I thought. Everything was over, but the thought of where this creature could be heading scared me very much. What tormented me most was the thought that it would now break the window and go inside. But none of this happened. I was sitting. It seemed like it had already passed. I took a flashlight, turned it on, and almost died of fear. That same white silhouette flashed right in front of me and ran into the hallway at high speed. My dog immediately rushed after him. I was so worried about him that I jumped off, took the axe and ran into the room after him. It seemed like that was it. There was no one there. Terry also calmed down and sat down next to me. But suddenly I saw that same silhouette in the window. He was slowly moving away from the house as if he didn't want to leave it. And at that moment the light turned on. I lost that silhouette from sight. It seemed like it wasn't so scary, but suddenly I heard someone's voice. And I remembered that I was watching TV, and now, when strashno.com turned on the light, it started working again. Terry and I went into that room and continued watching TV. There were no thoughts about sleep. And so it was until about 4 a.m. Then someone quickly passed outside the window. I again thought it was that creature. But no, it was my father. I went to open the door, and yes, it was him. He came in, took off his hat, walked into the room. I looked at him. He looked as if he was on the verge of death. I immediately asked what happened there and where Mom was. He said that Aunt Lena died. Her heart gave out, or something like that. But before her death, she managed to write, "In 40 days, come to my grave, otherwise." She could not write further. I felt very sorry for Aunt Lena. In the end, Dad said that we had to go to the city. I strashno.com got dressed, took Terry, and we went. When I arrived home, my mother was upset, and so was I. But then I remembered what happened to me at night and decided to tell them. After listening to me, my mother said that, most likely, Aunt Lena did not want to leave me. In 2 days, Aunt Lena buried, and then I remembered what my dad told me. Before her death, Aunt Lena wrote, "In 40 days, come to my grave, otherwise." 40 days passed. I decided to go to her grave. I went to our local cemetery, found her grave, sat next to her and read over the gravestone. "Everything will be fine. Just forget me." I didn't know what those words meant, so I decided to go home. I didn't want to talk about this to anyone. I dreamed about Aunt Lena Strashno.com. She had long hair, although she always had short hair. But then I hear her say, "I'm sorry," after which she turned and left. But then I woke up because of Terry. He joyfully pounced on me and began to lick my face. After that, I didn't dream about Aunt Lena anymore.